Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. And let's start a look at the top headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will certainly achieve its goal in Ukraine, warning that Moscow will use military means to liberate its land if Kyiv and what he calls its Western masters abandon dialogue. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum calls on the United Nations to step in to prevent violence in Venezuela as pressure on the country intensifies from the United States. Palestinian media report that at least one person has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in western Gaza City on the Hamas-controlled side of the ceasefire line. There is no immediate comment from the Israeli military. According to a new report by Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab, Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces have carried out systematic mass killings and disposed of bodies in the Darfur city of El Fasher. Warner Bros. Discovery's board rejected Paramount Skydance's $108.4 billion hostile bid, saying it failed to provide adequate financing assurances. Doctors in England began a 5-day strike on Wednesday over pay and working conditions during a surge in flu cases and with no end in sight to an increasingly bitter dispute with the government. Australian police have charged a man with 59 offences, including a terrorism charge over the shooting at Bondi Beach that killed many, as funerals were held in Sydney, while police has confirmed an injured officer lost an eye during acting with courage at the time of the shooting. Authorities are still searching for the gunman who killed 2 students at Brown University, with the manhunt stretching beyond 72 hours as police again appeal to the public for help. Local officials say video footage shows a possible suspect wearing dark clothes and a face mask near the scene as residents remain on the edge. Let's start with some news from Latin America. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has called on the United Nations to step in to prevent violence in Venezuela as pressure on the country intensifies from the United States. Speaking at a news conference on Wednesday, Sheinbaum said the UN has been noticeably absent and must assume its responsibility to prevent bloodshed and push for peaceful solutions. Her comments come a day after Washington announced a blockade of oil tankers linked to Venezuela that are under US sanctions. President Trump has steadily increased pressure on Caracas, while the United States has also expanded its military presence in the Caribbean, officially citing efforts to combat drug trafficking across Latin America. And now joining me in this discussion is Matthew Wadham, who is an American journalist and author. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us once again. Matthew, Claudia Sheinbaum, of course, reaching out to the United Nations, but do you think it can really help her nation against Trump's advancing position in Venezuela and the Caribbean?
Probably not. I don't foresee the United Nations getting involved in this burgeoning conflict, and it probably won't make any difference. But President Sheinbaum of Mexico, is a leftist, and she's probably sticking up for the leftist who's the dictator of Venezuela. As well, she doesn't like the idea of the United States being involved in the affairs of a country so close to her own. It makes her uncomfortable, especially when President Trump has threatened to send U.S. military forces into Mexico to deal with the drug cartels there. So Sheinbaum must find herself in a delicate position, and she's trying to make the best of it, I think.
All right. Well, do stay on with me, Matthew, as we proceed ahead in the bulletin. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has sharply criticized European Union plans to use frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine, calling the proposal reckless. Orban warned that the move could seriously damage Europe's financial credibility and create major risks for Belgium, where most of the frozen assets are held. European Union leaders are set to debate the issue at a summit, where they will also consider possible guarantees for Belgium. Around $230 billion in Russian assets are frozen across the European Union, with roughly $200 billion held in Belgium and small amounts in France, Luxembourg, Germany and Sweden. The funds are mainly parked at Belgium's central securities depository, Euroclear. Orban also accused Brussels of overstepping the rights of member states and pushing policies he claims are harmful to Europe's economy. Let's listen in.
They are in danger. If the European Union crazy idea go ahead to confiscate the Russian frozen assets, that would have tremendously bad impacts on the Euroclear company. But Brussels is a worrying player of the European politics by itself. Yeah. So what's going on here is to circumvent the rights of the member states daily. They would like to put forward programs which destroy the European economy, crazy madness, green theories, pro-migration policy, pro-war policy. So Brussels is a symbol of a political danger for a country like we are from Central Europe.
All right, let's request Matthew to join us back into the discussion here. Matthew, how viable is it for the European Union to go ahead with this plan? Of course, Russia is not going to allow that, but also with the opposition of Orban and also opposition coming from Slovakia, beg your pardon, on this plan, can European Union actually finalize this plan to use frozen Russian assets?
I think the Prime Minister of Belgium, Bart de Wever, also is opposed to it. He thinks it's a bad idea. I think he called it fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that Orban, Hungary's leader Orban, is opposed to it, because he is, although he is friendly to Western powers, he is also friendly to Russia's President Vladimir Putin, and he has warned that Russia will not take kindly to its assets being used against it in the war in Ukraine, and will retaliate in some way against European Union nations that support this or participate in this. So he thinks it's a bad idea to strip Russia of its own assets, of its own money, and use it against Russia. He thinks that it's unfair and just a politically unsound idea.
All right. How about the security guarantees that Zelensky is seeking to hold elections? Would you see Trump, even if it comes from the European Union, do you see Trump helping Zelensky with those security guarantees?
Trump might help. Trump might help to an extent, but you see, the United States is a conflict here at present, because the Trump administration is trying to pressure Ukraine into giving up its claim over territory that it lost to Russia through military conquest. And Ukraine President Zelensky has made it pretty clear that he will not do that. So, it's possible that the United States might support some kind of security guarantees for Ukraine, but it's really hard to tell, since the United States government at the moment is not supportive of the main thing that Ukraine cares about, which is getting its land that was seized through conquest by Russia back from Russia. So, you know, it's really hard to tell at this point.
Sure. All right, Matthew, thank you for joining us and helping us with your opinion on that. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move on to some more news now coming in. Now, Russian Defense Minister Andriy Belorusov says that Ukrainian forces are trying unsuccessfully to take control of the northeastern Ukrainian town of Kupiansk, which had a pre-war population of around 26,000. Belorusov also says that efforts by European leaders to prolong the conflict risked extending the fighting in Ukraine in 2026. Russia has repeatedly accused European countries of attempting to sabotage peace efforts between the US and Russia. Earlier, Ukraine said it had taken control of 90% of the Kharkiv region town, which Russia said it had captured in November after previously losing control of it in Ukraine's September 2022 counteroffensive. Let's listen in.
За год освобождено свыше 300 населенных пунктов, более 6 тысяч квадратных километров территории. Это на треть превышает прошлогодние показатели. Причем темпы продвижения группировок войск «Восток», «Центр» и «Запад» по сравнению с 2024 годом выросли в 1,5-2 раза. Группировка войск «Запад» заняла стратегически важный город Купянск, который противник безуспешно пытается себе вернуть. Через него проходили пути снабжения подразделений ВСУ. Это позволит расширить полосу безопасности в Харьковской области и снизить угрозу обстрелов противником северных. Ключевая задача на следующий год – сохранить и нарастить набранные темпы наступления. Все мы знаем, что сегодня предпринимается политико-дипломатические усилия по разрешению так называемого украинского конфликта. В то же время отчетливо видим попытки европейских руководителей и киевского режима уклониться от решения этого вопроса. Речь идет о затягивании конфликта с расчетом на максимальный.
Moving on, viewers, United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has criticized the ongoing doctor strike as dangerous and irresponsible, urging medics to prioritize patient care. This comes as doctors in England have launched a 5-day strike over pay and working conditions as the NHS faces a surge in flu cases. Junior doctors say their wages have been eroded for over a decade. Meanwhile, the government insists it cannot offer further increases, while officials warn the strikes risk patient care. Let's listen in to the comments coming in from British Prime Minister first.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear about the strikes. They're dangerous and utterly irresponsible. And my message to resident doctors is don't abandon patients, work with us to improve conditions and rebuild the NHS. But Mr. Speaker, they left the NHS absolutely on its knees, waiting lists through the roof and confidence absolutely rock bottom.
Outside St. Thomas's Hospital in London, patients and residents shared why they support the doctor's action. Let's listen in.
Are being forced to strike because there doesn't seem to be any other way of being heard and there being some kind of dialogue for them to actually be paid for what they deserve in terms of the work that they're doing. So the hospital departments have had to arrange cover to ensure that patient safety and patients are looked after and seen. So I'm not worried, but I am aware that impact it has on the staff that are working to cover patient care because actually they are being stretched. But I also have give my full support to the doctors here because they're not being paid to stand out here. They're fighting for everybody to get paid a decent wage.
For me, I think it's very underfunded for what they actually have to go through and do. It's stressful for a lot of people who work there, and getting appointments in general is really difficult. So I think they need a lot more help than they're getting right now. No reason for government to give pay cuts to doctors, nurses or anyone else. For something that's key frontline work in the UK that's needed. I mean, you wouldn't see a politician getting a wage cut. So.
Moving on, viewers, Palestinian media have reported that at least one person has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in western Gaza City on the Hamas-controlled side of the ceasefire line. There was no immediate comment from the Israeli military. The Gazan ministry says that this brings the death toll since the October 10th ceasefire to 394. With more than 1,000 injured. Meanwhile, the head of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, has warned that children in Gaza face no respite as severe weather linked to Storm Byron compounds an already dire humanitarian situation. Aid agencies say heavy rain and strong winds are worsening conditions for displaced families living in damaged homes and shelters, raising fresh concerns about safety, health, and access to basic services. Joining us in this discussion is Irina Sukaman, who's a senior journalist and joins us live from New York. Thank you, Irina, for joining us here at NewsX World. Now, Irina, this is another strike after the IDF killed the senior Hamas commander. Now, one person has again been killed in the western Gaza city. Do we have any information about whether this was a civilian that was struck down or any militant commander or leader?
So far, there's been limited information about this, but what we do know is that Israel tries to minimize civilian casualties as much as possible, and it is looking to eliminate Hamas command whenever they're involved in any sort of active violation. We also know that Hamas has tried to violate the ceasefire many times since its implementation, and that it has also been active in the West Bank and not just in Gaza. So, any action in eliminating or trying to eliminate such people always have to do with ongoing militant activity by the terrorist organization. Interestingly enough, it's only Israel that is getting pressured by the United States over its violations. The fact that Hamas has still not returned the final body of the hostages, that it has continuously called for escalation against Israel outside the Gaza borders, and it has actively celebrated and used as a propaganda mechanism the horrible massacre in Australia does not appear to be of great concern to the international community. Only Israel's strikes on Hamas officials seem to get everyone bent out of shape, and the question is why? Why is there such concern about a terrorist organization that is on many international blacklists and who are refusing to disarm or to leave Gaza, but there is no concern that these individuals are continuing to oppress their own people and continue to remain a threat not only to Israel but to the international community, including vulnerable Jewish communities everywhere.
Right, sure. But do also take us through how humanitarian efforts are now being proceeded, given that Gaza is already facing a severe storm situation and the latest strike has only worsened the condition.
Well, I don't think eliminating one person has a significant impact on overall conditions in Gaza, but the weather conditions are indeed a significant challenge. Moreover, they're a challenge to the flow of humanitarian aid, and they help Hamas consolidate their power because, as you're pointing out correctly, it is much more difficult to monitor not only violations of ceasefire, but Hamas's treatment of its own population. Hamas has used the current weather-related crisis as an opportunity to continue blocking aid from coming in and to continue its policy of internal oppression. We recently learned from Palestinian sources such as the Gazan American activist Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib that Hamas has previously hoarded baby food formula and prevented families with young children from accessing that. The same situation appears now at the height of humanitarian crisis. Yes, Hamas may not be using its missiles to attack Israel, but they're certainly using this pause in fighting to attack its own civilians in various ways, including by denying them access to humanitarian aid and then blaming Israel, the weather, and assorted enemies, political enemies, for its own actions.
Irina, would you say that the question of Muslim Brotherhood needs to be addressed for the situation in the Middle East to be resolved to some kind of peaceful normalcy?
I think the question of Muslim Brotherhood is central to this concern, because it's not just actors like Iran who've backed Hamas, though they certainly have. It's also countries and movements connected to Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas itself is an entity that is a direct byproduct of Muslim Brotherhood, and its ideology and its entire founding charter is based in Muslim Brotherhood language and ideology as well. That is to say, however, that first, countries need to have a consensus that Muslim Brotherhood and its various chapters, whether they're terrorist, whether they're designated as terrorist organizations or not, should not be tolerated and should not benefit from international support in any form. They have to understand that Muslim Brotherhood is a danger to Muslims everywhere and to people in general, more broadly, everywhere where they live. And they have to understand that Muslim Brotherhood will never reform. It will never become democratic and pluralistic. It is designed to be a hierarchical, exceptionalist, and highly fundamentalist movement that relies on distorted, politicized ideology, and it's designed to function that way and cannot exist otherwise. So if people wish to see pluralism, prosperity, peace, and security in the Middle East, Muslim Brotherhood in any of its iterations has to go. This is who keeps the ideology from Hamas flowing around the world, to Western campuses, to Arab streets, and to governing entities in various countries. This is who is pushing the sort of an indefinite crisis, an indefinite state of conflict, and this is who is trying to prevent integration between Israel and its neighboring countries. It's been weaponized, and it needs to be not simply designated, but fought very actively and by everyone, not just one or two countries.
All right. Thank you, Arina, for joining us for now and speaking to us. And we now move on, viewers. According to a new report by Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab, Sudan's paramilitary RSF have carried out systematic mass killings and disposed of the bodies in the Darfur city of El Fasher. Using satellite imagery, researchers say the RSF destroyed and concealed evidence following its violent takeover of the city in October. The report identified around 150 clusters consistent with human remains, including signs of execution-style killings and civilians shot while fleeing. Within weeks, many of those clusters disappeared, while new ground disturbances appeared nearby. Activity, researchers say, is not consistent with civilian burials. The findings estimate the death toll in Al Fasher could be even in tens of thousands. Aid agencies and the UN say tens of thousands of survivors remain trapped with communications cut as the wider Sudan war, now in its second year, continues to displace millions and fuel the world's largest hunger crisis. I request Irina to join us back in the discussion here. Irina, do take us through the escalating situation there in Sudan. There are now increasing reports that seem to suggest that RSF may be hiding the scale of atrocities, given that there have been mass burials as per satellite imagery that we just showed on our screens.
It's not just the mass graves that are an indication of genocidal intent. We have also seen massacres based in sectarianism that the RSF has perpetrated in hospitals and other entities, and that have already been documented. And it's very clear that the RSF, which is which has roots in the Janjaweed tribe-based organization that had at one point been reintegrated to some extent into the government forces, but then once again split off as its founder Hemeti entered into a state of conflict with the current official powers in Khartoum, that this organization is ruthless, lawless, supported by various external actors, and sees amassing power and taking control of the country as an imperative, regardless of the human costs. And the massacres against civilians indicate that this is not simply about military costs, but that it's also willing to attack anyone who is not ideologically supportive, and that the sectarian nature of the conflict underscores that RSF views as any tribe, family, or ethnic group that is against it as a potential enemy, no matter if they're civilians or even young children. Some of the previous massacres that have already been documented that took place in the Darfur part of the country were also explicitly sectarian in nature, when the black tribes rather than Arab tribes were singled out for massacres and for extreme mistreatment by RSF, which again lends credibility to the accusations of genocide and certainly of mass war crimes, for sure. So this imagery of mass graves is just another indication that RSF is engaging in horrific crimes, that it values no human life, but in particular maybe targeting specific tribes for sectarian and racial reasons. And we also are seeing that this conflict has become almost a proxy conflict for various interests, independently of the fight between the two power-hungry warlords in charge of the two different parts of the country. It's concerning that countries like Russia and the movements like the Muslim Brotherhood are lending their numbers and lending their political and funding and weapons support to both sides of the conflict, playing different groups against each other for the sake of advancing their own objectives and sacrificing as many Sudanese lives as needed to in order to gain even slight advantage over their political enemies inside the country.
Right.
So getting these powers out of the conflict could also help make this conflict less sustainable physically for the two warring factions, the leaders of which are already under sanctions by the United States.
All right. Thanks very much, Irina, for giving your perspective on that. And viewers, as we wrap up this bulletin, let's give you some news from the United Kingdom, where a 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a 9-year-old girl. The suspect was arrested in an area near the house in Weston-super-Mare where the girl was found. Police have named the victim as Arya Thorpe, who was found dead at a house in Lime Close, Weston-super-Mare. This was on Monday evening. The teenager suspect, who cannot be named due to his age, remains in custody and is due to appear at Bristol Magistrates Court later. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.